we've got everything from natural flavors to natural colors. There's nothing natural about a natural flavor, a natural color. There's no terminology or there's no guidelines or standards for the word natural. So you may read natural flavoring and you think, oh, it's natural, I can have that, that's fine. Or you might read natural color, but natural color has propylene glycol in it, polysorbate 80, and all these chemicals that if you saw them on your ingredient list, you'd go, well, I'm not touching that. You know, propylene glycol is part of antifreeze, and polysorbate 80 has been shown to cause health issues in mice. So it's an absolute minefield, and that's why I'm into exactly what Natasha Campbell McBride says, is we need to get back into the kitchen to feed and nourish our families, to heal this nation, whether it be Australia, the US, the UK, or Europe, or South Africa, or wherever we are, even in Samoa at the moment. We need to buy single ingredients and then have a fridge full of beautiful fruits and vegetables and meats and foods and cheeses and dairies and things like that. And then in our pantry, our nuts and our seeds and our grains. And we need to get back into that kitchen and feed our family with single ingredient foods that we can combine together to make stunning foods, which is, you know, what Nourishing Traditions is all about.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey, Hilda here. This is episode 229, and our guest is Cyndi O'Meara. Cyndi is an inspirational and influential nutritionist who is changing the dietary and lifestyle habits of countless people worldwide. Cyndi is the founder of Changing Habits and its Nutrition Academy, which offers a plethora of programs and products to educate and improve health and vitality. She is also the director of the 2017 documentary, What's with Wheat, and she is the author of Lab to Table. Today we sat down virtually, because she lives in Australia, to discuss what is in our food. We talk about food labels and how you can't always take the ingredient list at face value. For example, rosemary extract sounds benign, and so do the terms natural flavorings and natural colorings. But Cyndi peels back the curtain, revealing what these ingredients actually are and how they impact our health negatively. She also reveals the priorities of food manufacturers and much more. The conversation includes a discussion on how our own methane production could be affecting the climate, not just that of cows, the ingredients in synthetic meats, and so much more. In truth, Cyndi sounds the alarm to empower us to take back our health into our own hands, rather than continuing to be unwitting guinea pigs, part of a grand experiment with our health. Before we get into it, we want to invite you to become members of the Weston A. Price Foundation. We are a nonprofit supported by members committed to education, research, and activism. If you appreciate what we do and enjoy our projects like this podcast, join hands with us. Membership is only $40 a year, about the cost of an average monthly gym membership if you think about it. And you will help support this important work. Just go to the westonaprice.org website, click on the Become a Member link on our homepage, and thank you so much in advance. And this episode is brought to you in part by Grass-Fed Thymus by Ancestral Supplements. Ancestral Supplements makes New Zealand-sourced nose-to-tail organ meats, bone marrow, and thymus in simple, convenient gelatin capsules. Based on the ancient ancestral wisdom that like supports like, consuming thymus may strengthen and support your own thymus. Find out how thymus may help handle your allergies and support your immune health. Visit ancestralsupplements.com to find out what they can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Cyndi.
Thanks, Hilda.
Now, you have a book called Lab to Table. Lab to Table. I've heard of farm to table before, but not lab to table. What are you talking about?
There's a subheading, and it is stop being a lab rat and start making better choices for your table. Because what's happening at the moment is that we are lab rats. There's no science behind the combination of food additives that we're now seeing in our food supply. There's no safety. They call it GRAS, generally regarded as safe. But in actual fact, they only test one food ingredient at a time on mice or rats. So what we're doing is that we're part of some big, huge experiment. And I just look at the health of everybody, not just our children, but our adult population is getting worse and worse. Every time, like I was just at coffee this morning and somebody was saying, oh, my granddaughter's been diagnosed with autism and my grandson doesn't speak and he's 5. And I'm thinking, what is happening? And then one other person says, oh, I've been told I have no estrogen or progesterone and I'm wondering why I'm tired. This is an adult. So it's across the board. And my belief is that it is how our food is grown and what they're putting into our food and what they're convincing us to eat.
Now, some people would say, oh, Cyndi, you're way off base. It's probably just other environmental toxins that are causing these issues, not our food, for goodness sakes. What would you say to them?
Well, I think the first thing to do is go into your pantry and read the ingredients rather than the nutritional label, which tells you the carbohydrates, the fats, and the protein. Why don't you go and have a look at the ingredients and decide whether you think that they're a food? So the chemical companies, and there's only about 5 in the flavor industry, are masters of trickery. They have become brilliant at making food look like food, taste like food, smell like food, but not be food. And it means that the food is cheap. It's not grown in a field where the soil has been cared for and the microbes in the soil are thriving. These are all grown in chemical laboratories. Like I've looked at food and thought, where's the real food? And they'll actually put natural on the food labeling, all natural. I'll flip it over, read the ingredients, and I'll go, there's one whole food in there. That's it. Out of 50 ingredients or 15 ingredients or whatever amount of ingredients in there, there is one whole food in there. The rest has been manipulated, whether it's an isolate, a hydrolysate, a concentrate in the proteins, or the sugars could be maltodextrose or dextrose, or could be an artificial sweetener. There's no just, let's just have meat, let's just have a carbohydrate or real food, or let's, have a real fat instead of an interesterified or hydrogenated fat. And this is what I discuss in the book Lab to Table, is it's all coming from the lab and it's going direct to your table without you even realizing it. I was with a friend the other day and she knows I'm really particular about food, and she put a pate on the table. And, usually I'm pretty particular about it, but I thought I'll just taste it because usually I can taste if there's a flavor in there or something like that. So I tasted and I thought, wow, this is really good. This tastes, natural and real. And I said to her, would you mind if I just read the ingredients? I'm really interested in the company that's making this. I flipped it over and I thought, oh my goodness, they are even getting better than I ever believed at trickery, because not even I could taste the subtle difference between that real food and what these guys had done. And they'd put a flavor in, there was color, there were thickness, there was everything but the real thing.
So how did we get to this place? In other words, aren't the companies responding to consumer demand? How is it that we're asking for these things? Or are we?
I think there are people that listen to you, Hilda, and they know, and they're out there seeking the real thing, and they know what they're looking for. But there's a vast majority of the population. Like you think of the millions of people that live in the US, and in Australia, there's 23 million. There's only a small percentage that are demanding this, although I must admit in the 4 decades I've been a nutritionist, I am seeing more and more people looking at it. They're not so naive to this. So it is the people that I believe are asleep. They're not taking notice. They believe that a drug will fix their problem, or surgery, or radiation, or even chemotherapy. They believe that this is what's going to fix the problem. But in the end, all it does is mask the symptom rather than addressing the real issue. So I just believe that they're not awake to what is happening, and they really do believe surely the government wouldn't allow food to be put in the grocery store that was going to kill us or poison us or make us sick. But we can go all the way to the EPA and the CDC, and I'm looking at the corruption that's happening in there. And I follow Robert Kennedy, who to me is an incredible environmental lawyer that is not letting these people get away with things. And, the corruption that's happening in there, especially when we look at the chemicals that are being used on our food supply. Whoever believed that we could put masks on and safety suits on and spray our food just before harvest and think that we can have a salad or some bread made with that food and it be okay for our system.
Wow.
So I just think that if you're not aware and you're not listening and you're just looking at the propaganda and the marketing, then you're going to think it's okay because, like I said, they're masters of trickery. I mean, you don't know that what's in that food is really just a bunch of chemicals.
So let's get specific now. For the person who is starting to wake up or who's very interested in which chemicals, which additives are the most bad for us?
Yeah. Look, I just believe that most of the chemicals that are now being put out there, we need to really be wary of. Not all, but most. And what they're doing is that they're renaming them. So what would have been BHA and BHT, or in Australia we have a numbering system, and in England they have a numbering system, which is 320 and 321. But you would see the whole name, BHA and BHT, which I can't, it's butahydroxy, whatever. But it's an antioxidant. It's a chemical antioxidant. And they're renaming that rosemary extract. So someone will look at it and they'll go, well, it's rosemary extract. But in actual fact, it has nothing to do with the rosemary once the chemical has been pulled out of it. And it's an antioxidant that's found in the rosemary plant. So not only the leaf, but also the stem. And they pull out this one or two of these chemicals, and then they call it rosemary extract. But then they have to add excipients to it to stabilize it. And depending on whether it's going to be a powder or a liquid, they're going to have to add different things to that. Whether it goes for sweet or savory, they're going to have to add different things for that. So the renaming of our food additives, we need to be really careful about. And BHA and BHT have been known to cause cancer in rats. And that's by itself. That's not when you start to see celery powder. And celery powder may have nanotechnology, so you need to be very careful of that because there's not the research out there about, the size particle and what that's doing. And then, we've got everything from natural flavors to natural colors. There's nothing natural about a natural flavor or natural color. There's no terminology or there's no guidelines or standards for the word natural. So you may read natural flavoring and you think, oh, it's natural, I can have that, that's fine. Or you might read natural color, but natural color has propylene glycol in it, polysorbate 80, and all these chemicals that if you saw them on your ingredient list, you'd go, well, I'm not touching that. Propylene glycol is part of antifreeze, and polysorbate 80 has been shown to cause health issues in mice. So it's an absolute minefield, and that's why I'm into exactly what Natasha Campbell McBride says, is we need to get back into the kitchen to feed and nourish our families, to heal this nation, whether it be Australia, the US, the UK, or Europe, or South Africa, or wherever we are, even in Samoa at the moment. We need to buy single ingredients and then have a fridge full of beautiful fruits and vegetables and meats and foods and cheeses and dairies and things like that. And then in our pantry, our nuts and our seeds and our grains. And we need to get back into that kitchen and feed our family with single ingredient foods that we can combine together to make stunning foods, which is, what Nourishing Traditions is all about, and what I'm all about, and what I've always been all about. So I believe that I don't trust packaged foods at all. I actually don't go to a grocery store anymore. I have my food on my farm. What food I don't produce on my farm, I have delivered to my house by one of the farmers locally. And my nuts and my seeds, I purchase from places where they're not in packaging, but I have to go with my glass jar and get. So, look, it takes a little bit more effort, but my family enjoys unbelievable health. We do not have the maladies. We don't take medications. My kids are 30, 28, and 26, and they've never had an antibiotic. I'm 60 and I've never had an antibiotic. They've had no medications. And this is the life that you can live. You can have as much energy as you want, the health that we dream of, just by looking at your food supply and lifestyle.
I love it because you're taking your health into your own hands. You're investing in your family's health when you make the effort to grow and raise food or get it from a local farmer. I'm thinking that that's the problem also with the industry. It's not necessarily that everyone is out to trick us or manipulate us, but they are looking to cut corners because they don't have our health in mind.
Yeah, that it is cutting corners. I'm working with a huge company here in Australia. Like they've just sold to the Japanese for 1 point something billion. And the Japanese, thank goodness, have a 100-year plan, not a 2-year plan. And I've been talking to them about their ingredients. And I said to them, if you change 2 ingredients a year in 10 years, you will completely change the health of the Australian people. Because these are foods that they do premixes for like bakeries and the big grocery stores. And, I'm talking to them about glyphosate on the wheat. So they're now talking to the farmers. This is revolutionary what people are starting to do. But I do remember when I first started to speak to them, I told them the ingredients, I changed the ingredients of one of the foods that they sent me. And his first thing to me was, we have to make a profit, Cyndi. So they do have the best interests, but they also have to make a profit for themselves and their shareholders. So you're right, Hilda. They don't know. When I started talking to them about it, this is the big wigs of these companies. When I start talking to them about it, they've got families. They understand this, but they don't know any better. They're there to make profits. But once you tell them, they can't unknow this. And I'm hoping that in 10 years, I see an incredible change in this company.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm hoping so too, because you're right. Just changing a couple of ingredients for the sake of profit could change everyone's health for the worse.
Yeah. And it changes what the farmer has to do on their farm. And the farmers are scared. They have used Roundup and glyphosate for, a couple of decades, and they think it's the only way, but they didn't have it a couple of decades ago. So there is another way. And with regenerative farming and holistic farming and permaculture and biological farming and all these new beautiful things that are happening out there, well, I hope to see a shift, and I think we will start to see a shift. And we need our animals. This vegan, vegetarian, well, not so much the vegetarian movement, but the vegan movement scares me because I need animals to fertilize my land. I can't do it without my cows and my chickens and my pigs. I can't do it. I have to have them.
Can you explain what the animals do for your land?
Well, the cattle, we put them in these things called cells. So they're wired in electric fencing, and they're left in this cell only for a day. And they eat the grass, they poo and they wee, and then we move them to a nicer grass, and they're ready to move. They know when they're being moved, and we move them to the next grass. And a couple of days later, we put the chickens in behind them, and the chickens spread their poo and pick out all the parasites. And then we'll put the pigs in, and the pigs will root up any weeds if it's needed, if they feel the land. They're amazing, the pigs. And so we do this cycle on our land, and we have drought here in Australia, and I look at our neighbour's land to our land, and the difference is incredible. Our land still has grass. We're still able to feed our cattle, but they've had to get their cattle off the land because there's nothing left. It's almost a desert on the other side of the fence. And ours is looking pretty dry at the moment because we've had nothing, and the dams are going down. But we've still got 18 cattle on our acreage. So we're pretty happy because there's not many cattle around at the moment because of this. And our chickens are happy too. So we've done this cycle for 5 years. We've had the land, and we've done this cycle. And now in crisis, we're actually seeing and reaping the benefits of how we do this.
But if we didn't have those animals, the land would be arid. It wouldn't be regenerated. The soil wouldn't be vibrant, fertilized by the manure and the wee, as you say, of the animals, right? We need all of that. It's all part of the cycle of life. And you're right, the push to avoid meat altogether for the sake of the animals is really not good for any of us, nor the land.
No, it's not good for our health, number one, not good for the land, not good for the climate. Everyone's talking about the 1.3 billion cattle producing methane, but they forget that there are 8 million humans that also produce some amounts of methane, especially if they have fructose malabsorption. And more people have fructose malabsorption because we're not eating the right foods, because our microbiome is being decimated. Therefore, we don't have the microbiome that uses the fructose to produce our aromatic amino acids, which is all part of the importance of our neurological systems and our brain. And so we're seeing issues with depression, anxiety. They're increasing. I've never seen this that I'm seeing today. Kids with anxiety, adults with anxiety. So we see this cycle of life being disrupted, and we just have to go back to our anthropological ways, our evolutionary ways, but in a modern way we can do this. We don't have to go back to being hunter-gatherers or agriculturalists. What we have to do is just think of how we can mimic this, but in a very, very modern way. And it's happening. And I know you speak to people, and I know at the Nourishing Traditions conference, this is what's happening, and it's happening in Australia as well. And I am, I'm happy to see that.
Absolutely.
But what upsets me is the fake meats that we're seeing. That's what scares me, Hilda.
Coming up, Cyndi explains how genetically modified organisms are being used to produce ingredients for synthetic meats. And honestly, it sounds like something out of a science fiction novel to me. And she also discusses how there are no long-term studies on the combination of chemicals in these pseudo-meats.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Do you appreciate the work we do as the Weston Price Foundation? The podcast is just the tip of the iceberg, to be honest. We do extensive research to discover the science behind wise traditions. We find the best experts to write articles for our journal and to interview on this podcast on topics that matter to you, like microwave radiation, raw milk, sunscreen, parenting, and more. And we alert you regarding legislative matters that affect your food freedom. So if this sounds wonderful to you, and if you're grateful for it, we're grateful for you and invite you to join hands with us. Become a member and support this work. Just go to our website, westonaprice.org, and click on Become a Member. And welcome to the family. And this episode is brought to you in part by grass-fed thymus by Ancestral Supplements. Ancestral Supplements makes New Zealand-sourced nose-to-tail organ meats, bone marrow, and thymus in simple, convenient gelatin capsules. Based on the ancient ancestral wisdom that like supports like, consuming thymus may strengthen and support our own thymus. Just in time for allergy season, support your thymus this spring with unique peptides such as thymosin, thymopietin, and serum thymic factor to regulate, strengthen, and support immune health. Thymic extracts have been shown to normalize and modulate the ratio of T helper cells to suppressor cells, whether the ratio is low, as in chronic infections and cancer, or high, as found in allergies and autoimmune diseases. In other words, thymic factors appear to balance the immune response up or down as needed. So visit ancestralsupplements.com to see what they can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions.
Well, there's this thing called biotechnology or synthetic biology. And, everyone's concerned about the genetic modification of our food supply, such as our corn and our soya and sugarcane. And, there's quite a few things that are genetically modified. But what I don't think a lot of people realize is that there's this new biotechnology in synthetic biology, which is the genetic modification of microorganisms. And they could be yeast or mold or bacteria. And they're genetically modifying them with, say, plant species, a gene from a plant, or a gene from another animal, or a gene from something that allows these microorganisms to produce en masse food additives. So one of those food additives is citric acid. So once upon a time, citric acid came from the citrus fruit, but now it's coming from a genetically modified mold. And in the fake meat movement, they're producing a thing called legohemoglobin. It's soya legohemoglobin. And they've realized that there's this nodule on the soya plant, on the root of a soya plant, that has a heme group in it. And so they've taken the gene out of the soya plant that produces this nodule with the heme iron in this nodule, and they've implanted it into a bacteria. And so now this bacteria produces this soya legohemoglobin. So they're saying, so we don't have to use soya plants and use the root of the soya plant. We now have this bacteria that we've genetically modified in order to produce this soya legohemoglobin. And this has the ability to bleed the meat. So the meat bleeds as a result, the fake meat that is, has this bleeding notion. And it also helps with flavor. So they can add flavor enhancers and they can add modulators, and all these gases are produced that if they selectively choose them, they produce bison taste or smell. It produces chicken, turkey. So it's all very manipulated. And the only studies that have been done on this go for 29 days. There's no long-term studies. And the study is only done on that one chemical. They're not done on all the other chemicals that are in the meat or the fake meat. So the best thing is to flip over your pack of fake meat and have a read of the ingredients. And it doesn't matter who's producing it. It may not just have legohemoglobin. It may have other things in there as well, because they're masters of this, and this synthetic biology and this biotechnology is increasing. So they make vitamin C like that. They make, like I said, citric acid, xanthan gum. So more and more of our additives are now being produced as a result of this biotechnology and synthetic biology. So we don't even know anymore which ones are which. I just have to keep looking up the patents. Whenever I look up a patent, I find that they're now doing it via synthetic biology and biotechnology.
Wow. And because they've been used for such a short time and because they haven't done a lot of studies, essentially that's why you were saying we're also like lab rats ourselves, because we're going to ingest this, or we are ingesting it unwittingly, and it may be very detrimental to our health because we don't know what our body's going to react, how it's going to react to it.
No, we don't. And I think the legohemoglobin really bothers me because we're really beginning to understand our storage for iron, and that is our ferritin, and how if it's too little or too much, and especially too much, it can actually cause heart failure. Not heart disease, but heart failure. I don't know. I haven't seen the studies. I'm musing here. I don't have the science to back this comment up, but I'm musing that will this amount of soy legohemoglobin, will that be stored in the body in a different way? Will it become a problem? And will we start to see heart failure in our young, in our middle-aged? I don't know. I just think about it and I go, well, we don't have the studies to prove this. We don't have the long-term studies, and I'm not going to be the one that's going to be one of their studies.
Right.
I'm going to stick to my real foods, my whole foods, and my real meat, my ethically grown meat, my meat from my farm. You know, I do fall in love with my cows. I really do. And you can't help it. Like I was with them all day yesterday. I was weeding. We manually weed. And we just had a couple of weeds that were a little bit out of control. And my son said to me, Mama, we need a weeding party. And, you know, I'm like 2 inches from the cows weeding, and they don't care. They're the most beautiful. They're not skittish. They trust us. They live an amazing life with us. And some we keep, you know, some we do keep. We can't keep them all, but some we do keep, and we breed with them. And we have a beautiful girl named Alice. And as my son says, I can't get rid of Alice, Mum. And, you know, it's just, this is a part of our life. And I have to go, how can I save the animals in the woods if I can't save the humans on the planet? We have to start helping our humans make better choices for themselves, and that's through nourishing themselves. And evolutionary wise, we have never been vegans. There is never a culture that has ever been a vegan. Yes, vegetarian, and that was the Hindu culture, and they lived on the equator. But outside the equator, there has never, ever been a vegan nation.
Yeah, Dr. Price traveled the world looking for a nation or a culture that was primarily plant-based, and he couldn't find them. Because there are certain
No.
nutrients, as you know, that we need from animal products exclusively, or that we can get exclusively from animal products. So I wanted to ask you, you've been talking about this shift back to real food. And I know you have a nutrition academy, and I know you've worked with people one-on-one. Can you tell us a story of someone who made that shift back to real food and what happened to their health?
I've been probably doing this 40 years. And when I first started this, you'd see people go from the SAD diet, which is the standard American diet or the standard Australian diet. You'd see them shift from that to the real food diet. Like, let's get out of breakfast cereals and, pre-made breads and things like that. And let's just go back to real food. So I'd see that shift and you would see miracles happen. And I remember a farmer coming to me. He was in his 70s and he had a numb leg and he was feeling tired, and he and his wife were just not doing well. And I remember as a young 25-year-old telling him what to do. And the respect I have for farmers, and, especially a farmer that's been doing it so long, was great. And he sat with me with his arms folded, didn't say a word while I said this is what he needed to do. And as he left, I thought, hey, he's not going to change. I can see he's not going to change. So he rings me a week later and he says, Miss Lovett, because that was my maiden name, I want to speak to you. I need to come and see you today. So I said, I've got a free time at such and such. And he comes in and he says, I want to tell you a story. He said, I am the best pear farmer where I live. He said, 5 years ago, my pears were terrible. I was using the chemicals. I was doing all of this stuff. And I decided I was going to change back to my old ways, back to the way I used to farm, where I mulched and I pruned and I did everything right. He says, I am the best pear farmer in the district. And he said, what an idiot I've been. I did it to my farm and I forgot to do it to myself. And so he said, I'm going to do what you've told me to do. So this time I'm going to listen. So I put him back to real foods, and he rang me and he said to me, it was like 6 weeks later, and he says, my numb leg's gone. I feel amazing. My wife feels amazing. We've decided to let the farm to the kids. We're going traveling. And he and his wife went off traveling. So, this was in my early days. Now what I see is if I see someone on the SAD diet and I put them on a real food diet, I don't always see that result, because I feel that we have gotten so bad in our health that we're not seeing that, 6-week turnaround. Some people, yes. Some people, no. Because some people are allergic or food sensitive or have bad guts, and we've got to put them on extreme diets like GAPS or the ketogenic diet or something, that isn't just the real food diet that we used to be able to do. So I started the Nutrition Academy because I realized, number one, people were asking me, we want to know what you know, Cyndi. Teach us what you know. And so I started the Academy just to teach people. But then but now we want to create businesses of it. And all of a sudden I went, I'm 60 next year. And I'm not going to be able to continue to travel the way I travel. And I don't want to do that anymore. I love my farm. I love my beach. I love everywhere where I live. And I want to stay home more. So I thought, this is a good way in Australia to get the message out. And then I have people from Korea and England and China and through America that have also started to do this course. And I think what it's doing for people, it's bringing them back to their roots, because I have two overarching principles. The first is the principle of anthropology, because I did anthropology at university and that's what got me interested in nutrition. So I talk about cultures and traditions and how we ate and how we survived and how we adapted and things like that. So that's the core of the teachings. And the other principle is the principle and philosophy of vitalism, where we look at the human body as a whole, not as a part. We look at where they live on this planet, and we look at their relationships and their connection and the environment that they live in. So we also look at food in that way as well. So we don't look at butter for 50% saturated fat. Not that I believe saturated fat is bad in any way. I've never believed that, because it's an ancient fat. But many people looked at fat for its saturated fat content and forgot the other 50%. Well, what's in that? Well, there's omega-3s, there's butyric acid, there's factor X, there's all of these incredible fats in butter that help us heal. So those are the two principles of the Nutrition Academy. And I think it brings people back to it. And then when they see something from the University of Sydney that they're advertising at the moment, that a high carbohydrate, low fat diet, moderate, even low protein, I think they said, diet is the secret to longevity and health.
Oh.
And they know that they can look at that and go, well, what's happening with that research, and where's the data, and how is that, how does that work? So I know there are cultures out there that had a high carbohydrate diet. Look at the Danny and Lanny of Papua New Guinea, but they live near the equator. And 90% of their diet was plant-based, but 10% was wild pig and insects. So they still had that, protein there. So they can question these things and they can look at the quality of food. So the Nutrition Academy is there to help people who want to not only help themselves, but help their family, understand what's happening in our lives and what's happening on this planet. And if they want to help their community become part of the ripple effect that will create this tsunami of change that will help our future generations find health again and not be in the situation that we're in now. So I don't know what's happening in the US, but in Australia, between 38 and 40% of our children under the age of 17 have one or more chronic diseases. Whereas in the 1960s in Australia, it was 2%. So that's a dramatic difference between the 1960s and here we are.
Yeah, it's huge. No, we're in the same place where 1 in 2 children has some kind of chronic illness. It's really, really very alarming. But I feel encouraged because there are people like you out there, your academy, every individual that attends that, every person that listens to this podcast is really a person who is making a shift in their own life, going to improve the health of those around them. And again, there will be that ripple effect. So whether we can start a business or just feed our children, we are going to be a part of turning the tide around. And I'm so thankful.
Yeah.
So Cyndi, you've already nourished and informed us and educated us in such a great way on this conversation. And I'm really thankful. And I just want to ask you one last question. If the listener could do one thing to improve their health, just one thing, what would you recommend that they do?
It's not going to be food. It's actually going to have a morning routine that gets you jumping out of bed and looking at that sunrise, getting outside, putting your feet on the ground and, creating a morning routine that makes you feel alive, that then you're able to come back into the kitchen to feed and nourish your family to heal this nation. So for me, it's about that morning routine of watching the sunrise and, that sunshine. We know the ability of it to change the biochemistry of our body. And a lot of people aren't doing this at the moment. So that would be my beginning, and then coming home into the kitchen and making sure that breakfast is a brilliant breakfast of whole foods. Get rid of the breakfast cereals and the modified milks and the white sugar, and look at, there's so many recipes out there for alternative breakfast. So is that too many things, or that's just one, isn't it?
It's just one. It's a lovely, nourishing morning routine that starts with that sunrise, something that makes you jump out of bed in the morning and makes you feel alive. I love it so much. And I lived that with you. When we were together there, I got to experience that morning swim with you, which was phenomenal. So, but wherever we live, we can apply that. So thank you, Cyndi. Yes. Thank you for your time, and keep up the amazing work.
Thank you, Hilda.
Our guest today was Cyndi O'Meara. Visit her website for all sorts of resources, changinghabits.com.au. And I'm Hilda Labrador. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the show notes for this and every podcast episode, just visit our website, westinaprice.org, and go to the podcast page. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.